Teachings of Lord Caitanya, the Golden Avatar, a treatise on factual spiritual life, by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Chapter 23, Why Study the Vedanta Sutra? Knowledge is information gathered from the scriptures, and science is practical realization of that knowledge. Knowledge is scientific when it is gathered from the scriptures through the bona fide spiritual master, but when it is interpreted by speculation, it is mental concoction. By scientifically understanding the scriptural information through the bona fide spiritual master, one learns, by one's own realization, the truths of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The transcendental form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is different from material manifestations, and it is above the reactions of matter. Unless one scientifically understands the spiritual form of the personality of Godhead, one becomes an impersonalist. The example comparing the Lord and the material manifestations to the sun and the sunshine is often given. The sunshine in itself is illumination, but that illumination is different from the sun. Yet, the sun and the sunshine are not differently situated, for without the sun there can be no sunshine, and without sunshine there is no meaning to the word sun. Unless one is freed from the influence of the material energy, he cannot understand the Supreme Lord and his different energies, nor can one who is captivated by the spell of material energy understand the spiritual form of the Supreme Lord. Unless there is realization of the transcendental form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unless there is realization of the transcendental form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no question of love of God. And without love of God, there is no perfection of human life. Just as the 5 gross elements of nature, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether, are both within and without all living beings in this world, the Supreme Lord is both inside and outside this existence, and those who are His devotees can realize this. Pure devotees know very well that they are meant to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that all things that exist constitute the means by which they can serve the Lord. Therefore, because a pure devotee has been blessed by the Supreme Lord from within the core of his heart, wherever he looks, he sees the Lord, and nothing more. Srimad Bhagavatam 11:2-55 confirms this relationship between the pure devotee and the Supreme Lord as follows. Visrajati hridayangna yasya sakshad darir avashabhito pyagoganashaha pranaya rashanaya dritangiri padmaha sa bhavati bhagavata pradana uktaha. Quote, if a person's heart is always tied to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord with the rope of love, the Lord does not leave him, even if his remembrance is not perfect. Such a devotee is to be considered first class. Unquote. An example of this is described in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:34. When the gopis assembled for their rasa dance with Krishna, Krishna apparently left them. Consequently, they began to chant the holy name of Krishna, and, being overwhelmed with madness, inquired about Krishna from the flowers and creepers in the forest. Krishna is like the sky. He is situated everywhere. Therefore, by studying Srimad Bhagavatam, we can learn about our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord, understand the procedure for regaining Him, and attain the ultimate realization, which is love of Godhead. Next, Lord Caitanya explained to Prakashananda Saraswati how one can achieve the Supreme Personality of Godhead by devotional service. First, the Lord quoted a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 11:14-21, in which Krishna says that He can be realized only through devotional service executed with faith and love. Indeed, it is devotional service alone which purifies the heart of the devotee and elevates him to the ultimate realization, by which he serves the Supreme Lord with faith and love. Even if one is born in a low family, like a family of chandals, dog-eaters, one can become filled with transcendental symptoms through realization of the supreme stage of love of Godhead. These transcendental symptoms are mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam 11.3.31. Smarantaha smarayantascha mito gogha harang harim bhaktya sanja taya bhaktya bibhratyut pulakang tanum. Quote, when pure devotees discuss subjects dealing with the Supreme Lord, who can cleanse all kinds of sinful reactions from the heart of his devotee, they become overwhelmed with ecstasy and display different symptoms due to their devotional service, unquote. The Bhagavatam 11.2.40 also states, quote, when pure devotees chant the Lord's holy name due to their spontaneous attachment for the Lord, they sometimes cry, sometimes laugh, sometimes dance, sometimes sing, and so on, not caring for any social convention, unquote. We should understand, therefore, that Srimad Bhagavatam is the real explanation of the Brahma Sutra, for it is compiled by the same author, Vyasadeva himself. In the Garuda Purana it is said, Arto yang Brahma Sutranang Bharatartha Vinirnayaha Gayatri Bhashya Rupo So Vedartha Paribrim Hitaha Granto Shtadasha Sahasraha Srimad Bhagavata Bidaha. Quote, Srimad Bhagavatam is the authorized explanation of the Brahma Sutra, and it is a further explanation of the Mahabharata. It is the explanation of the Gayatri Mantra and the essence of all Vedic knowledge. This Srimad Bhagavatam, containing 18,000 verses, is known as the explanation of all Vedic literature, unquote. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the sages of Naimisharanya asked Sutta Goswami to explain the essence of Vedic literature. In answer, Sutta Goswami presented Srimad Bhagavatam as the essence of all the Vedas, histories, and other Vedic literatures. Elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam 12.13.15, it is clearly stated that Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all Vedanta knowledge, and that one who relishes the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam has no taste for studying any other literature. In the very beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, the purport of the Gayatri Mantra is described, quote, I offer my obeisances unto the Supreme Truth, unquote. Thus, from the first verse, Srimad Bhagavatam deals with the Supreme Truth, which is described in the Bhagavatam as the source of creation, maintenance, and destruction of the cosmic manifestation. Obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Vasudeva, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, directly indicate Lord Sri Krishna, who is the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. That Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is more explicitly presented that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is more explicitly presented later in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.3.28, where Vyasadeva asserts that Sri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead and that all others are either his direct or indirect plenary portions or portions of those portions. Srila Jiva Goswami has still more explicitly developed this subject in his Krishna Sandarbha, and Brahma, the original living being, has substantially explained the subject of Sri Krishna in his treatise Brahma Samhita. The Samaveda also verifies the fact that Lord Sri Krishna is the divine son of Devaki. In his prayer, Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1, the author of Srimad Bhagavatam first proposes that Lord Sri Krishna is the primeval Lord, and if any transcendental nomenclature for the absolute personality of Godhead is to be accepted, it should be the name Krishna, meaning all-attractive. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord has affirmed in many passages that he is the original personality of Godhead, and this was confirmed by Arjuna, who cited great sages like Narada, Vyas, and many others. Also, in the Padma Purana, it is stated that of the innumerable names of the Lord, the name Krishna is the principal one. Therefore, although the name Vasudeva indicates the plenary portion of the personality of Godhead, and although all the different forms of the Lord are identical with Vasudeva, in this text, Vasudeva principally indicates the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. Sri Krishna is always meditated upon by the Paramahamsas, those who are most perfect in the renounced order of life. Vasudeva, or Lord Sri Krishna, is the cause of all causes, and everything that exists is an emanation from him. How this is so is explained in later chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu describes Srimad Bhagavatam as the spotless Purana because it contains transcendental narrations of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The history of Srimad Bhagavatam is also very glorious. Sri Vyasadeva, drawing on his mature experience of transcendental knowledge, compiled it under the instruction of Sri Naradaji, his spiritual master. Vyasadeva had compiled all the Vedic literatures, the four Vedas, the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra, the Puranas, and the Mahabharata. Yet he was not satisfied. His dissatisfaction was observed by his spiritual master, and thus Narada advised him to write about the transcendental activities of the Lord Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna's transcendental activities are specifically described in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the canto considered to contain the substance of the whole work. One should not approach the 10th canto immediately, but should approach it gradually by developing knowledge of the subject matters first presented. Generally, a person with a philosophical mind is inquisitive to learn of the origin of the creation. He sees the night sky and naturally asks, what are the stars? How are they situated? Who lives there? And so on. All these inquiries are quite natural for a human being because his consciousness is more developed than the animals. In answer to such inquiries, the author of Srimad Bhagavatam says that the Lord is the origin of the creation. He is not only the creator, but the maintainer and annihilator as well. The manifested cosmic nature is created at a certain period by the will of the Lord. It is maintained for some time, and finally it is annihilated by his will. Thus, he is the supreme will behind all activities. Of course, there are atheists of various categories who do not believe in the Creator, but that is due only to their poor fund of knowledge. The modern scientist creates Sputniks, and by some arrangement or other they are thrown into outer space to fly for some time under the control of a scientist far away. All the universes and the innumerable planets within them are similar to such Sputniks, and they are all controlled by the personality of Godhead. In the Vedic literature, it is said In the excuse me. In the Vedic literature, it is said that the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, is the chief among all living personalities. All living beings, from the first created being Brahma down to the smallest ant, are individual living entities, and above Brahma, there are many other living beings with individual capacities. The personality of Godhead himself is also a living being, as much an individual as other living beings, but the Supreme Lord is the supreme living being, with the greatest mind and the supermost inconceivable energies in great variety. If a man's mind can produce a Sputnik, we can very easily imagine that a mind higher than man's can produce wonderful things far superior to man-made Sputniks. A reasonable person will accept this argument, but stubborn, obstinate people will not. Srila Vyasadeva at once accepts the Supreme Mind as the Parameshvara, the Supreme Controller, and offers his respectful obeisances to him. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita and all other scriptures written by Srila Vyasadeva, that Parameshvara is Sri Krishna himself. This is specifically stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord himself says that there is no Paratattva, Samam Bonam, other than him. Therefore, the author at once worships the Paratattva, Sri Krishna, whose transcendental activities are described in the 10th canto. Unscrupulous persons go at once to the 10th canto, especially to the 5 chapters in which Srila Vyasadeva has kindly described the Lord's rasa dance. However, this portion of Srimad Bhagavatam is the most confidential part of that great literature. Unless one is thoroughly accomplished in the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, one is sure to misunderstand the Lord's worshipable transcendental pastimes in the rasa dance and his loving dealings with the gopis. This subject matter is highly spiritual and technical, and only liberated persons who have gradually attained the stage of Paramahamsa can transcendentally relish the worshipable rasa dance. Therefore, Srila Vyasadeva gives the reader a chance to gradually develop in spiritual realization before actually relishing the essence of the pastimes of the Lord. Thus, at the beginning, Vyasadeva purposefully invokes the Gayatri mantra with the word Dhimahi. The Gayatri mantra is especially meant for spiritually advanced people. When one attains success in chanting the Gayatri mantra, he can enter into the transcendental position of the Lord. But in order to chant the Gayatri mantra successfully, one must first acquire the Brahminical qualities and become perfectly situated in the mode of goodness. From that point, one can begin to transcendentally realize the Lord, his name, his fame, his qualities, etc. Srimad Bhagavatam is a narration dealing with the Swarup, form of the Lord, which is manifested by his internal potency. This potency is distinguished from the external potency, which has manifested the cosmic world within our experience. Srila Vyasadeva makes a clear distinction between the internal and external potencies in the very first verse of the first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. In that verse, he says that the internal potency is factual reality, whereas the external manifested energy in the form of material existence is temporary and illusory, no more real than a mirage in the desert. Water may appear present in a mirage, but real water is somewhere else. Similarly, the manifested cosmic creation appears to be reality, but it is simply a reflection of the true reality which exists in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, there are no mirages. Absolute truth is there. It is not here in the material world. Here, everything is relative truth, with one apparent truth depending upon another. This cosmic creation results from an interaction of the 3 modes of material nature. The temporary manifestations are so created as to present an illusion of reality to the bewildered mind of the conditioned soul, who appears in so many species of life, including higher demigods like Brahma, Indra, Chandra, and so on. In fact, there is no reality in the manifested world, but there appears to be reality because of the true reality in the spiritual world, where the personality of Godhead eternally resides with his transcendental paraphernalia. The chief engineer of a complicated construction does not personally take part in the construction itself, but it is he only who knows every nook and corner of the construction, because everything is carried out under his direction only. In other words, he knows everything about the construction, directly and indirectly. Similarly, the personality of Godhead, who is the supreme engineer of this cosmic creation, knows very well what is happening in every nook and corner of the cosmic creation, although activities appear to be performed by someone else. In actuality, from Brahma down to the insignificant ant, no one is independent in the material creation. The hand of the Supreme Lord is everywhere. All material elements, as well as all spiritual sparks, are but emanations from him only. Whatever is created in this material world is a result of the interaction of these two energies, material and spiritual, which emanate from the Absolute Truth, the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna Vasudeva. A living entity known as a chemist can manufacture water in the laboratory by mixing hydrogen and oxygen. But in reality, the living entity works under the direction of the Supreme Lord, and all the materials he uses are supplied by the Lord. Thus, the Lord knows everything directly and indirectly in minute detail, and he is fully independent as well. He can be compared to a gold mine, and the objects within the cosmic creation can be compared to ornaments made from that gold, such as gold rings, gold necklaces, and so on. The gold ring and necklace are qualitatively one with the gold in the mine, but quantitatively the gold in the mine and the gold in the ring or necklace are different. The complete philosophy of the Absolute Truth, therefore, centers about the fact that the Absolute Truth is simultaneously one with and different from his creation. Nothing is absolutely equal to the Absolute Truth, but at the same time, nothing is independent of the Absolute Truth. Conditioned souls from Brahma, the engineer of this particular universe, down to an insignificant ant, are all creating something, but none of them are independent of the Supreme Lord. The materialist wrongly thinks that there is no creator, but his own good self, and this misconception is called Maya, or illusion. Due to his poor fund of knowledge, the materialist cannot see beyond the purview of his imperfect senses. Thus, he thinks that matter automatically takes its own shape independent of a conscious background. This is refuted by Srila Vyasadeva in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. As stated before, Vyasadeva is a liberated soul, and he compiled this book of authority after attaining spiritual perfection. Since the complete whole, or the Absolute Truth, is the source of everything, nothing is independent of him. In one sense, everything that exists is the body of the Absolute Truth. Any action or reaction of a part of a body becomes a cognizable fact to the embodied soul. Similarly, since the creation is the body of the Absolute Truth, then everything in the creation is known to the Absolute, both directly and indirectly. In the Shruti mantra, it is stated that the Absolute Whole, or Brahman, is the ultimate source of everything. Everything emanates from him, everything is maintained by him, and at the end everything enters into him again. That is the law of nature. This is confirmed in the Smriti mantra. There it is said that at the beginning of Brahma's millennium, the source from which everything emanates is the Absolute Truth, or Brahman, and that at the end of that millennium, the reservoir into which everything enters is that same Absolute Truth. Material scientists haphazardly take it for granted that the ultimate source of this planetary system is the sun. but they are unable to explain the source of the sun. In the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, the ultimate source is explained. According to the Vedic literature, Brahma is the creator of this universe, but because he had to meditate to receive the inspiration for such creation, he is not the ultimate creator. As stated in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, Brahma was taught Vedic knowledge by the personality of Godhead. There it is said that the Supreme Lord inspired Brahma, the secondary creator, and enabled him to carry out his creative functions. In this way, the Supreme Lord is the supervising engineer. The real mind behind all creative agents is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita 9:10, Sri Krishna himself states that it is he only who superintends the creative energy, Prakriti, the sum total of matter. Thus, Sri Vyasadeva worships neither Brahma nor the sun, but the Supreme Lord, who guides both Brahma and the sun in their creative activities. The Sanskrit words abhigya and swarat, appearing in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, are significant. These two words distinguish the Lord from all other living entities. No living entity other than the Supreme Being, the Absolute Personality of Godhead, is either abhigya or swarat. That is, none of them are either fully cognizant or fully independent. Everyone has to receive knowledge from his superior. Even Brahma, who is the first living being within this material world, has to meditate upon the Supreme Lord, and take help from him in order to create. If neither Brahma nor the sun can create anything without acquiring knowledge from a superior, then what to speak of the material scientists, who are fully dependent on so many things? Modern scientists like Jagadish Chandra Bose, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, etc., may boast of their respective creative energies, but all were dependent on the Supreme Lord for so many things. After all, the highly intelligent brains of these gentlemen were certainly not products of any human being. The brains were created by another agent. If brains like those of Einstein or Newton could have been manufactured by a human being, then mankind would produce many such brains instead of eulogizing these scientists. If such scientists cannot even manufacture such brains, what to speak of foolish atheists who defy the authority of the Lord? Even the Mayavadi impersonalists who flatter themselves that they have become the Lord are not abhigya or swarat, fully cognizant or fully independent. The Mayavadi monists undergo a severe process of austerity and penance to acquire the knowledge needed for becoming one with the Lord, but ultimately they become dependent on some rich follower who supplies them with requisite paraphernalia to construct great monasteries and temples. Atheists like Ravan and Hiranyakashipu had to undergo severe austerities before they could flout the authority of the Lord, but ultimately they were so helpless that they could not save themselves when the Lord appeared before them as cruel death. This is also applicable to the modern atheists who dare flout the authority of the Lord. Such atheists will be dealt the same awards as were given in the past to great atheists like Ravan and Hiranyakashipu. History repeats itself, and what occurred in the past will recur again and again when there is necessity. Whenever the authority of the Lord is neglected, the penalties dealt by the laws of nature are always there. That the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, is all perfect is confirmed in all Sruti mantras. It is said in the Sruti mantras that the all-perfect Lord glanced over matter and thus created all living beings. The living beings are parts and parcels of the Lord, and he impregnates the vast material nature with the seeds of the spiritual sparks. Thus, the creative energies are set in motion for so many wonderful creations. When one atheist argued that God is no more expert than the manufacturer of a subtle watch that has so many delicate parts, we had to reply that God is a greater mechanic than the watchmaker, because he creates one machine in male and female forms that go on producing innumerable similar machines without the further attention of God. If a man could manufacture a set of machines capable of producing other machines without the man giving the matter any further attention, then that man could be said to equal the intelligence of God. But that is not possible. Each and every one of man's imperfect machines has to be handled individually by a mechanic. Because no one can be equal to God in intelligence, another name for God is Asa Mordwa, which indicates that no one is equal to or greater than him. Everyone has his intellectual equal and superior, and no one can claim that he has neither. But this is not the case with the Lord. The Sruti mantras indicate that before the creation of the material universe, there existed the Lord, who is the master of everyone. It was the Lord who instructed Brahma in Vedic knowledge. That personality of Godhead has to be obeyed in all respects. Anyone who wants to become freed from material entanglement must surrender unto him, and this is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Unless one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, it is sure and certain that one will be bewildered, even if he happens to be a great mind. Only when great minds surrender unto the lotus feet of Vasudeva and know fully that Vasudeva is the cause of all causes, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 7:19, can they become Mahatmas, or the truly broad-minded. But such broad-minded Mahatmas are rarely seen. Only they, however, can understand that the Supreme Lord, the absolute personality of Godhead, is the primeval cause of all creations. He is the ultimate, Parama, truth, because all other truths are dependent on him, and because he is the source of everyone's knowledge, he is omniscient. There is no illusion for him, as there is for the relative knower. Some Mayavadi scholars argue that Srimad Bhagavatam was not compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, and some suggest that the book is a modern creation, written by someone named Vopadev. In order to refute this meaningless argument, Srila Sridhar Swami points out that many of the oldest Puranas make reference to Srimad Bhagavatam. The first shloka, or verse, of Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the Gayatri Mantra, and there is reference to this in the Matsya Purana, the oldest Purana. In that Purana, it is said about the Bhagavatam that in it there are many narrations and spiritual instructions, that it begins with the Gayatri Mantra, and that it contains the history of Vitrasur. It is also said that whoever makes a gift of this great work on a full moon day attains to the highest perfection of life and goes back to Godhead. There is also reference to Srimad Bhagavatam in other Puranas, which even indicate that the work consists of 12 cantos and 18,000 shlokas. In the Padma Purana, there is also a reference to Srimad Bhagavatam during a conversation between Gotama and Maharaj Ambarish. The king was advised to read Srimad Bhagavatam regularly if he at all desired liberation from material bondage. Under these circumstances, there is no doubt regarding the authority of Srimad Bhagavatam. For the past 500 years, since the time of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, many scholars have made elaborate commentaries upon Srimad Bhagavatam and have displayed unique scholarship. The serious student will do well to attempt to go through these commentaries in order to more happily relish the transcendental messages of the Bhagavatam. In his commentary on the Bhagavatam, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur specifically deals with original and pure sex psychology, Adi Rasa, devoid of all mundane inebriety. The entire material world turns due to the basic principle of sex life. In modern human civilization, sex is the central point of all activities. Indeed, Wherever we turn our face, we see sex life prominent. Thus, sex life is not unreal, but its true reality is experienced in the spiritual world. Material sex is but a perverted reflection of the original. The original is found in the absolute truth. This validates the fact that the absolute truth is personal, for the absolute truth cannot be impersonal and have a sense of pure sex life. The impersonal monist philosophy has given an indirect impetus to abominable mundane sex because it overly stresses the impersonality of the ultimate truth. The result is that men who lack knowledge have accepted perverted material sex life as all in all because they have no information of the actual spiritual form of sex. There is a distinction between sex in the diseased condition of material life and sex in the spiritual existence. Srimad Bhagavatam gradually elevates the unbiased reader to the highest perfectional stage of transcendence, above the three kinds of material activities, namely fruitive actions, speculative philosophy, and worship of functional deities indicated in the Vedas. Srimad Bhagavatam is the embodiment of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, and is therefore situated in a position superior to other Vedic literatures. Religion includes four primary subjects: 1. Pious activities, 2. Economic development, 3. Satisfaction of the senses, and 4. Liberation from material bondage. Religious life is distinguished from the irreligious life of barbarism. Indeed, it may be said that human life actually begins with religion. The four principles of animal life, eating, sleeping, defending, and mating, are common to both the animals and human beings. But religion is the special concern of human beings. Since human life without religion is no better than animal life, in real human society there is some form of religion aiming at self-realization and referring to one's eternal relationship with God. In the lower stage of human civilization, there is always competition between men in their attempt to dominate material nature. In other words, there is continuous rivalry in an attempt to satisfy the senses. Thus, driven by sense gratificatory consciousness, men perform religious rituals and pious activities with the aim of acquiring some material gain. But if such material gain is obtainable in another way, this so-called religion is neglected. This can be seen in modern human civilization. Since the economic desires of the people appear to be fulfilled in another way, no one is interested in religion now. The churches, mosques, and temples are practically vacant, for people are more interested in factories, shops, and cinemas than the religious places erected by their forefathers. This definitely proves that religious rituals are generally performed for the sake of economic development, which is needed for sense gratification. And when one is baffled in his attempt to attain sense gratification, he takes to the cause of salvation, in order to become one with the Supreme Whole. All these activities arise with the same aim in view: sense gratification. In the Vedas, the four primary subjects mentioned above are prescribed in a regulative way, so that there will not be undue competition for sense gratification. But Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental to all these sense-gratifying activities of the material world. It is a purely transcendental literature, understandable by the devotees of the Lord, who are above the competition for sense gratification. In the material world, there is keen competition between animals, between men, between communities, and even between nations, in an attempt to gratify the senses. But the devotees of the Lord are above all this. Devotees have no need to compete with materialists, because they are on the path back to Godhead, back home, where everything is eternally and fully blissful. Such transcendentalists are 100% non-envious and are therefore pure in heart. Because everyone in the material world is envious, there is competition. But the transcendentalists, or devotees of the Lord, are not only free from all material envy, but are also kind to everyone, in an attempt to establish a competitionless society with God in the center. The socialists' idea of a society devoid of competition is artificial, because even in the socialist states, there is competition for the post of dictator. It is a fact, therefore, that sense gratification is the central principle of materialistic life, whether based on the Vedas or simply on common human activities. There are three divisions of the Vedas. The first division, the Karma Kanda, recommends fruitive activities by which people can advance to higher planets. Above this is the Upasana Kanda, which recommends worship of the various demigods for the purpose of attaining their planets. Finally, there is the Jnana Kanda, which recommends activities that enable one to reach the absolute truth and realize his impersonal feature in order to become one with him. But the impersonal aspect of the absolute truth is not the last word. Above the impersonal feature is the Paramatma, or Supersoul, and above that is the personal aspect of the absolute truth. Srimad Bhagavatam gives information about the personal qualities of the absolute truth beyond the impersonal aspect. Topics concerning these qualities are greater than topics of impersonal philosophical speculation. Consequently, Srimad Bhagavatam is given higher status than the Jnana-kanda division of the Vedas. Srimad Bhagavatam is also greater than the Karma-kanda and Upasana-kanda divisions because it recommends the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, the divine son of Vasudeva. The Karma-kanda division of the Vedas is fraught with competition to reach heavenly planets for better sense gratification, and this competition is also seen in the Jnana-kanda and Upasana-kanda divisions. Srimad Bhagavatam is above all of these because it aims only at the supreme truth, the substance or root of all categories. In other words, from Srimad Bhagavatam we can know the substance as well as the relativities in their true sense and perspective. The substance of the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the relativities are the different forms of energy which emanate from him. Since the living entities are also his energies, there is nothing really different from the substance. At the same time, the energies are different from the substance. This conception is not self-contradictory. Srimad Bhagavatam explicitly deals with this simultaneously one and different philosophy, a philosophy also found in the Vedanta Sutra, which begins with the Janmadhyasya Sutra. Knowledge of the simultaneously one and different nature of the absolute truth has been imparted for the well-being of everyone. Mental speculators mislead people by trying to establish the energy of the Lord as absolute, but when the truth of simultaneous oneness and difference is understood, that truth is more pleasing than the imperfect concepts of monism and dualism. By understanding the Lord's simultaneous oneness with and difference from his creation, one can immediately attain freedom from the threefold miseries inflicted by the body and mind, by other living entities, and by acts of nature over which we have no control. Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the surrender of the living entity unto the absolute person. This surrender is made with full awareness of the devotee's oneness with the absolute person, and at the same time his eternal position of servitorship toward him. In the material conception, one falsely thinks himself the lord of all he surveys. Consequently, he is always troubled by the threefold miseries of life. But as soon as one comes to know his real position in transcendental service, he at once becomes freed from all the above-mentioned threefold miseries. The position of servitor is wasted in the material conception of life. In an attempt to dominate material nature, the living entity is forced to offer his service to the relative material energy. When this service is transferred to the Lord in pure consciousness of spiritual identity, the living entity at once becomes free from the encumbrances of material affliction. Over and above this, Srimad Bhagavatam is the personal commentary on the Vedanta Sutra by Vyasadeva after he had attained maturity in spiritual realization. He was able to write it by the mercy of Narada. Srila Vyasadeva is an incarnation of Narayana, the personality of Godhead. Therefore, there is no question about his authority. Although he is the author of all Vedic literature, he specifically recommends the study of Srimad Bhagavatam above all other books. In other Puranas, various methods for worshipping demigods are mentioned, but in Srimad Bhagavatam only worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is mentioned. The Supreme Lord is the whole body, and the demigods are different parts of that body. Thus, one who worships the Supreme Lord need not worship the demigods, for the Supreme Lord is at once fixed in one's heart. Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu distinguished Srimad Bhagavatam from all other Puranas by recommending it as the spotless Purana. The transcendental message is received through the ears by the method of submissive hearing. A challenging attitude cannot help one receive or realize the transcendental message. Therefore, in the second verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, the word shrushu is used. This word indicates that one should be eager to hear the transcendental message. The desire to hear with interest is the primary qualification for assimilating transcendental knowledge. Unfortunately, few people are interested in patiently hearing the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. The process is simple, but the application is difficult. Those who are unfortunate will find time to hear ordinary social and political topics and all sorts of idle talks. But when they are invited to join an assembly of devotees to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, they are reluctant to attend. Or they will indulge in hearing portions of Srimad Bhagavatam they are unfit to hear. Professional reciters of the Bhagavatam indulge in reciting the portions dealing with the confidential pastimes of the Supreme Lord. These portions appear to be sex literature. Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be heard from the beginning, and those who are fit to assimilate the messages of the Bhagavatam are mentioned in the very beginning. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.2. The bona fide audience fit to hear Srimad Bhagavatam consists of those who have performed many pious deeds. But any intelligent person, by thoughtful discretion, can come to believe in the assurances of the great sage Vyasadeva and patiently hear the messages of Srimad Bhagavatam in order to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. One need not struggle through the different Vedic stages of realization, for one can quickly be lifted to the position of Paramahamsa simply by agreeing to patiently hear the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. The sages of Naimisharanya told Sutta Goswami that they intensely desired to understand Srimad Bhagavatam. They were hearing from Sutta Goswami about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they were never satiated by these discussions. People who are really attached to Krishna never stop wanting to hear more and more about him. Lord Caitanya therefore advised Prakashananda Saraswati, quote, "Always read Srimad Bhagavatam and try to understand each and every verse. Then you will actually understand the Brahma Sutra. You say that you are very eager to study the Vedanta Sutra, but you cannot understand the Vedanta Sutra without understanding Srimad Bhagavatam," unquote. He also advised Prakashananda Saraswati to always chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I forgot to say unquote, I think. So the quotation of Lord Caitanya speaking to Prakashananda Saraswati ends, "You cannot understand the Vedanta Sutra without understanding Srimad Bhagavatam," unquote. And then Prabhupada continues, he also advised Prakashananda Saraswati to always chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And then back to a quote. Quote, by doing this, you will very easily be liberated. After liberation, you will be eligible to achieve the highest goal of life, love of Godhead. Unquote. The Lord then recited many verses from authoritative scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Nrsimha Tapani Upanishad. First, he quoted this verse from the Bhagavad Gita, 1854. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Na Shochati Na Kankshati Sama Sarvishu Bhuteshu Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param. Quote, when one actually becomes self-realized, knowing that he is Brahman, he becomes happy and joyful, and he no longer feels any lamentation or hankering. Such a person sees all living entities on an equal level, and he becomes a pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unquote. Next, he quoted a statement from Shankar Acharya's commentary on the Nrsimha Tapani Upanishad 2.5.16. This statement says that when a person is actually liberated, he can understand the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Lord and thus engage in his devotional service. Lord Caitanya also quoted a verse from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 2.1.9, in which Shukadev Goswami states that although he was elevated to the liberated stage and free from the clutches of Maya, he was still attracted by the transcendental pastimes of Krishna. Consequently, he studied Srimad Bhagavatam from his father Vyasadeva. Next, Lord Caitanya quoted another shloka from Srimad Bhagavatam 3.15.43, which deals with the Kumaras. When the Kumaras entered the temple of the Lord, they were attracted by the aroma of the flowers and tulsi leaves offered to the lotus feet of the Lord with pulp of sandalwood. Simply by the Kumaras smelling the aroma of these offerings, their minds turned to the service of the Supreme Lord, although the Kumaras were already liberated souls. It is stated elsewhere in Bhagavatam 1.7.10 that even if one is a liberated soul and is actually free from material contamination, he can still become attracted to rendering the Supreme Lord devotional service that is causeless and unhampered by any material propensity. This is because God is so attractive, and because he is so attractive, he is called Krishna. In this way, Lord Caitanya began to discuss the Atmarama verse from Srimad Bhagavatam with Prakashananda Saraswati. Lord Chaitanya's admirer, the Maharashtrian Brahman, related that the Lord had earlier explained this verse in 61 different ways. Everyone assembled was very eager to hear the different versions of the Lord's explanation of the Atmarama shloka. And since they were so eager, Lord Caitanya again explained the shloka in the same way that he had explained it to Sanatana Goswami. Everyone who heard the explanations of the Atmarama shloka was amazed. Indeed, everyone considered Lord Caitanya to be none other than Sri Krishna himself.